I'm trying to do small manufacturer.
Oh my God, you're watching something. I have to go ahead, so I have to buy the ball in there.
You say hi to
He's busy now. It's busy.
Sorry. So you're processed here yet, or you? We have not. Okay. So in the future, what's your?
Is signing.
So we're really hoping to do, start permanent.
Yeah.
Like, we're kind of-
This is the main background. Blueberry and blueberry.
Show that.
Oh, I know. But this is the kind of stuff, like, where will this go? Right in the land.
And like, exactly.
This is a multi-layer, metallized. There's no, it goes straight to the landfill.
But
Carbon's been on that, it says it right on there, you can't.
ready.
So that's where we see the value is we're working on materials that. Now, we don't. Where's my stuff material? We're the very.
So that would be possible. Just to make sure we're on. Like,
They don't. If they do, then, you know, they've got time to put in and they just leave, then they. Manufacturer, we'll have some that we can run. They have some that. So it doesn't come up a lot. But yeah, I'm sure they have their own priorities. I just am not always aware of those.
Yeah.
Where.
So.
That's, oh, yeah, I get a few clients that are not different manufacturers themselves, you know, why looking for these clients for their home. And. Where. Yeah, that people not followed in our body, you know, watching. Yeah, definitely keep that in mind though. It's like. But I know you does help. It's pretty. Like down, for this camera.
Reach out.
Doing our instruction and what that looks like. Instructions just to have.
Leah, could you say something?
Yes.
Just want to follow it. Yeah, hey there. Okay, yeah. This is like this so that she's back.
Yeah, you can mute your microphone and your computer.
Yeah.
Oh goodness, I got quiet. I can't hear you. I hear you anymore.
So you can't be inside.
Well, I can mute it from the microphone.
All right, everyone, it is 8:30, so we're gonna go ahead and.
Kayla, I can't hear you, so you'll have to clue me in on when you'd like me to start.
All right, you're good.
About now.
I can hear you now.
Good, okay. So we help Ohio manufacturers and food processors scale and compete through innovative solutions. We help three different sectors of our industry. Food processors, we assist with food safety, product development, process engineering, and smart manufacturing. Our Northwest Ohio manufacturers, we assist with continuous improvement, quality systems, workforce solutions, and Industry 4.0. And our small business program, which you are in the home of the small business program right here at the NAP, networking opportunities, business technical solutions, and kitchen facility launchpad, which is the NAP. So I want to give a brief introduction to our speaker today. She's going to be giving us insights on the small scale food business guide and offer practical guidance in navigating requirements that help ensure compliance and product safeties. Leah Hetrick grew up in Perrysburg, Ohio, where she was active in equestrian sports, focusing on hunter, jumper, and equestrian disciplines. She graduated from Notre Dame Academy High School in 2014. She earned her bachelor's degree in agriculture from The Ohio State University and completed her Juris Doctorate at the University of Toledo in 2021. Before joining the Ohio Farm Bureau in 2023, Leah served as the Chief Legal Assistant to Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose. Let's go ahead and welcome Leah, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Hello. Thank you for having me. My name is Leah Hetrick, like she said. I recently put together this small scale farm-based food business guide, like she said, which kind of just walks you through some of those harder to find, harder to process sometimes regulations that you can find when it comes to food safety, and kind of narrows it down to what you need to know by food, by where you want to sell. It was a project that was near and dear to my heart for a while. It was a lot of work, but I think it's very helpful when looking through all the confusing regulations that you may run into. So just a disclaimer, like I always say with my presentations, this is just for informational and educational purposes only. This is not legal advice. And for this presentation in particular, this is just a bite-sized portion of the laws. We're really going to look through a high-level overview of some of the things you might encounter with some of the more common things people would like to do that farm-to-table, home-based type sale to maybe supplement their income or start on a bigger venture one day, but start small somewhere right now. So like I said, we're going to be looking at farm to table home-based foods. It's just going to be that overview. And we're going to be focusing on small scale and sales within Ohio. So I'm not going to touch too much on going over state lines because then we're going to talk, that goes more into, can go more into those federal rules. And I would need a lot more time to be hitting on all the federal regulations that you could run into if you start getting into that bigger scale, that going over state lines. So in the interest of time and covering as much as I can, we're going to stay within the state of Ohio. I always like to introduce the agencies. Those are kind of the faces in the crowd when you start walking into what you need to look at. On the federal scale, you're going to have the FDA, so the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. They're the ones in charge of promoting and protecting public health through the regulations, and they promote public safety. They're the ones who kind of create the baseline, the things that states are going to look at to for how they should start farming their own food safety codes. USDA, so the Department of Agriculture, are going to ensure that there's safe and wholesome production of all meat, poultry, and processed egg products. So you think more on the animal side, they're looking to make sure that everything in the meat production is going to be safe and good and healthy for when that goes to market. And then CDC, I always like to throw them in there just because they're the ones monitoring the foodborne illnesses and making sure that we don't have anything going around crazy, making people sick. So you may hear about them when you hear especially about any foodborne illnesses. The agencies in the state and local levels, which is what you'd see more often when you're practically dealing with food sales, is going to be the Department of Agriculture. They're going to ensure safety of the state's food supply and the health of Ohio's food, animals, and plant life. Then you have the Department of Health. They kind of work hand in hand with the Department of Agriculture and also with the local health districts to promote public health and safety. Um, Local health departments, there's 111 local health districts. Those are the people you're going to actually meet, especially when you get into the retail food establishment licensing. So locally is where you're going to hit all of those people that you're actually going to talk to, whereas you will talk to people in the Department of Agriculture, depending on what you're doing. So those are just the people you're going to be seeing when it comes to these regulations and who you need to contact. So the way I like to look at food law and food safety law is kind of setting a baseline again of, the standard. So the standard in Ohio law is a premise or anywhere that has food stored, processed, prepared, or manufactured needs to be a retail food establishment that is licensed. So a retail sale of food to the ultimate consumer, anything that was prepared. So anything that really touches food, if you're receiving it, if you're holding it, if you're preparing it, anything along those lines, that's going to fall within the retail food establishment. Food, any raw, cooked, processed, edible substance. So, just follow, everything is kind of under that umbrella when you think of food products. And unless it's otherwise exempt, it's going to be under that food retail establishment. Sorry. Sorry, I thought we had a question. Retail food establishment license umbrella. There's a couple different types of retail food establishment licenses. There's temporary licenses. We have a mobile retail food establishment license, which I'll talk about later. And they're also put into risk levels. So you're going to have multiple risk levels. And as the risk of food illness gets higher based on the food and the safety of that food, you're going to see more regulations that go along with those. We're going to be talking more about lower risk foods today. But just so you're aware, the more hazardous a food you'd like to sell is going to be, the more regulatory burden that you're going to see when it comes to what you need to do in order to be able to obtain that license. Retail food establishment licenses come from your local health department. So you are reaching out to your local health inspector to see what you would need to do in order to get whatever particular food, whether it be selling freezer beef, whether it be doing an entire restaurant, they're the ones you're going to contact to make sure that you are compliant, and so they can come and inspect to make sure you are being safe. So when we're going to exclusions, one of those exclusions from getting a retail food establishment license is a farm market. So a farm market is a producer-operated facility that offers fruits and vegetables, cottage food products, maple syrup, honey, commercially prepackaged foods, cider, other juices, and then raw eggs, and then those freezer beef and the poultry as well. One caveat to that is while a farm market can have freezer beef and the freezer poultry or the poultry as well, you're going to still need a retail food establishment license. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So farm markets, you can apply to have that registered online through ODA. You can do it voluntarily. Not all farm markets are exempt from RFE licensing, like I said. But if you do not have a farm market registration with ODA, you may not be exempt as well. So getting that registration is important to make sure you're kind of covering all your bases if you're selling a mixture of different foods. But again, depending on what you sell, you may not. You just have to look at everything you're selling as a whole. So what do they look for in an inspection? Food safety, they're going to start with, is the food from a legally compliant source? Is there proper labeling in all the foods you're selling? If you have any food that's not safe, are you throwing it away? Do you have a plan to throw that away in a proper way? Is the food protected from contamination? Is anything displayed on the ground? While there are some instances like whole and intact raw items, think corn that hasn't been checked, that's okay sometimes. So they're going to make sure the food is in a good and safe manner and healthy. What else are they looking for? Are the eggs clean? Are they sound? Are they maintained properly? If ice is being used, are you using it with proper water source to make that ice? Cider and juices manufacturing, are you doing that properly in terms of good manufacturing practices? proper equipment and sanitation? Are you using all the proper and recommended tools in order to store food? And again, proper water supply. When it comes to proper water supply, they are going to, if you use a well, they're going to make sure that you're doing well testing every year. They want to make sure that's coming from a safe source. No one's getting sick from the water. Separate from farm market or farmers markets. Farmers markets are, think the typical walking down the street, selling under a tent. Those things you see, I have one every week in my little town here. So at a farmer's market, you're able to sell fresh, unprocessed fruits and vegetables. You can sell cottage food products. You can also sell the honey, the tree syrup, apple butter. If you have the permits to do it, you can also sell wine and then commercially prepackaged food as well. We'll talk about farmers markets again a little bit when we get to the meat portion again. So there is that other exemption from retail food. Now, as I, again, have a caveat, I am going to talk about a lot of exemptions from this retail food establishment licensing, but this is not all of them. Again, just looking at a bite-sized portion. So I may not hit on one of those things that you know of. It's just, again, kind of pulling out some of those more common ones I see. So first, like food category I'd like to talk about is cottage foods. Cottage foods is kind of the quintessential home good to market that a lot of people think of. A cottage food operation is made in a person's home. It's only for foods that are not potentially hazardous foods. So that's including bakery products, jams, jellies, fruit butter, some of those things that you think of that aren't going to be a high risk of getting people sick. So potentially hazardous, what is that? A potentially hazardous food is a food that's a natural synthetic to which the following applies. So the pH is greater than 4.6 when measured at a certain temperature. The water activity is greater than 0.85. And it requires temperature control to make sure that there's no microorganism growth, anything that can make someone sick. So if something needs refrigerated, it likely is not going to be found on that cottage food product list. ODA's made it very easy to know what is allowed under cottage food law. They have a list. It is an all-inclusive list. If you don't see it on the list, it is likely not something that is going to be accepted as a cottage food. You can find this list on their website. They make it very easy to find. So it's like you see on the list, it's things that you typically think of not very dangerous, something that's not going to need a lot of control to make sure that it's not getting spoiled or anything like that. They also do have available on their website things that are not included in the cottage food list, things that they have decided that they want to share that you should not be trying to make as a cottage food, just to make it even more clear what you can and cannot be doing under the cottage food law. As you can see, there's some items that kind of have a little bit of crossover. So some of those, baked goods, when you start moving into adding fruit fillings and things like that, things that require temperature control, that's when you start getting into, you might need to contact someone about getting a license or registering with ODA or the health department to make sure you have the proper facilities to ensure safe quality food. Labeling cottage food products. So labeling, you're going to still have to include a statement of responsibility, so the business name and address, a statement of identity, so the common name of a product, the ingredient list, so, in descending order, so whatever has the most amount is going to be the amount, the highest amount of an ingredient is going to be the first thing you put and go down from there, the net quantity of contents in a package. And then you always have to put a cottage food declaration on the label that says this product is home produced, so people know that it's a cottage food product, has come from your home. Some other notes, if there's an allergen, a major food allergen, you can declare that on the label as well. You cannot make any statement of some nutrient statement, so low sodium, no salt, things like that, unless you're going to put the nutrient label box on that. So the thing you typically see on the back of your cereal box, how much cholesterol, how much anything like that, that's going to fall within the scope of federal guidelines. So if you're going to make a content claim or a content claim such as that, you're going to need to look into doing that nutrient ingredient box. So this is what a label typically looks like. I pulled this, you see kind of the arrows. I've pulled this from the Small Scale Food Business Guide. This is just the typical label. It needs to be placed in a prominent place on the package so it's easily seen. So nothing too crazy, just making sure you're hitting all of those markers, making sure you're including everything so you're not mislabeling a product. Where can your cottage foods be sold? So cottage foods can only be sold within Ohio, but you can take them to a farm. You can sell them at your farm market. You can take them to farmers markets. You can sell them directly from where you produce them. You can take them to a farm product auction, and you can also take them to a festival or celebration organized by a political subdivision. So think a fair. Honey, I like to throw honey in right after I talk about cottage foods because honey, flavored honey is a cottage food, but honey in and of itself technically doesn't fall within the scope of the cottage food exemption, though it does have its own exemption. A small honey processor, so is a beekeeper that is jarring their own honey, and that honey that they are jarring it within that jar, at least 75% is coming from their own hives. They're going to be exempt from the normal licensing, registration, and mandatory inspection that they might find for other honey producers. So I like to talk about them immediately after cottage foods because they kind of go hand in hand. If you start adding flavoring to the honey, that still goes within the cottage food. Honey labels, you're still going to have that statement identity, net quantity of contents, ingredient list, statement of responsibility. For the ingredient list, if it is just honey, it's not necessary because it's just a one ingredient item. You can reuse jars. So if you're jarring honey, jars may be reused as long as they are being sanitized properly, but you cannot reuse the closures. Again, honey can be sold at farm markets, farmers markets, at the site of production, and at those festivals. Labels should be glued to the jar, but if for some reason they can't, it's okay to also use them as a tag. So you can tag it onto the jar, it's just so long as that label is on there. So some people look at the cottage food list and they think, well, I see everything, but I'd really like to sell my cheesecake. Can I do that from home as well? Well, you can, as long as you get a home bakery license, which is kind of the step up. So a home bakery is any person who owns or operates a bakery within their home. You're going to have only one oven that is of residential quality. You can't have a commercial oven. And you have to be in the primary residence and you can't have a secondary kitchen. So what you're using has to be within your home, something you use normally. So you don't have to get all special and crazy when it comes to home bakery. You actually cannot get all crazy when it comes to home bakery and start getting into those commercial items. You're going to be able to, once you have the home bakery license, do things like cheesecake, cream pies, custard pies, pumpkin pies, all those things that you think about that you throw in the fridge, but you can still keep doing the cottage food as well. So you're kind of expanding your scope on what you can do. When they come in to inspect, so you will have to register with ODA, they will come and inspect and make sure that your walls, ceiling, floors are in good repair, that everything is kept sanitary, that you don't have pets, there's no pests, that you have the ability to keep things refrigerated properly. So they're going to check out your fridge and make sure that it's in good order and keeping things at the proper temperature. And they're also going to be sure that you have well testing. So they're going to look, if you use a well, they're going to look and make sure that you have a test available. That's something you should have ready. If you do apply for a home bakery license, you should have your well testing available as well as the label for when they come so they can look at that. Speaking of the label, same sort of things as cottage food, except if it is an item that needs refrigerated, you need to include keep refrigerated. You also will need to include a sell-by date or a perishable date if it is something that diminish within 30 days. So those are going to be the extra things you need to think about in the label. You do not need to include the cottage food statement on the home bakery license when you have that, or I'm sorry, on a home bakery item when you have that home bakery license. Same thing, if you make a claim like there's no salt, you're going to start moving into some of those federal guidelines where you have to include the nutrient box with all the information. So if you would like to make those claims, you need to look into what you would need to do to include that. Again, here's just an example that I pulled from the small scale home bakery guide. Very simple, again, nothing too crazy. As long as you put it in a prominent display, there's going to be some, they do have some minimum requirements for the font. That is something that you need to look into as well. So it needs to be something that can be easily read. Home bakery license, this is what the request for registration form looks like. Again, found online. It's an annual fee of $10. When you request an appointment, they will come out, check everything out, and make sure you're keeping everything safe like we talked about before. Make sure you have that label and the well test. It's pretty simple. Once you have that, you can sell your goods from your home bakery, from grocery stores, convenience stores, farm markets, farmers markets, and you can also take home bakery items outside of Ohio to sell them, with the caveat, the little asterisks, that you need to make sure, say you're going to Michigan, that you're also following their food safety laws. So while you can take them out, you need to make sure you're also compliant with the state you'd like to sell in. Fruits and vegetables, just quickly, fresh unprocessed fruits and vegetables may be sold at a roadside stand where only fresh fruits and vegetables are offered. You can't take them to farmers markets, farm product auctions, festivals, and a registered farm market. The FSMA is what covers kind of the food safety when it comes to fruit and vegetables. That is going to be the federal guidelines. If you make more than $25,000 off of your fruits and vegetables, that's when you need to start worrying about the things that you need to do. The produce safety rules go through things like training requirements for supervisors, employees, health and hygiene for the people who are working on the farm, the water you're using, the biological soil amendments of an animal origin. So anything that could come from, something that can make someone sick coming from animals, equipment and tools you're using. So there's a whole scope of things that you would need to worry about when you start getting into the FSMA rules. You can call ODA and request a voluntary inspection or help looking through the requirements and whether or not you need to be following the FSMA, or they can help you decide if you can start moving towards that if you'd like to get bigger into selling fruits and vegetables. So that's something to keep in mind. Eggs. So small egg operators is someone who has 500 or fewer birds annually, and they wish to sell from the location other than the premise where the eggs are being produced. So this, a small egg operator, we're kind of not talking about when they sell from their farm. This is when you want to take it off farm, take it to those farmers markets. Egg labeling, the name and the address of the operation needs to be on the carton, an accurate statement of the quantity. So if it's dozen, put 12. The date the shells were packaged. You need to label it ungraded or unclassified. You need to label it mixed size, and you need to include the safe handling statement, and it's there word for word. You just grab that and put it onto the carton. When it comes to packaging, you can reuse cartons. So say you go down, we have Kroger here, you go down to Kroger, you have leftover cartons that you'd like to put your eggs in. It's fine to use those as long as they are clean, and as long as you cross out, get rid of, make it unreadable, any information that is not from you. So you need to make sure Kroger's not on there. You need to, if it is a grade A, or you need to cross those out. Anything that doesn't qualify needs to be crossed out. And again, make sure the packages are clean before you send your own eggs out in them. Egg refrigeration. So if you are selling as a small egg operator, especially off the farm, eggs need to be kept at or below 45 degrees Fahrenheit. On the farm, eggs may be refrigerated by mechanical means, but if you're taking them off the farm, so during transit, you can use gel packs and coolers. You don't want to use ice, that creates potential for contamination. So the recommendation really is to do layer of gel pack egg, just to make sure they're staying at the proper temperature and is safe. If you are only selling eggs off the farm, there is not refrigeration requirements. So that differs from when you start moving into the small egg operator wanting to take those to farmers markets. ODA registration for eggs, there's no registration fee when it comes to registering as a small egg operator. ODA will come and inspect to ensure that there's proper packaging and labeling, proper refrigeration, private well tests. Again, they want to make sure you're using proper water. Registered producers can sell eggs at a retailer, restaurant, farm, and farmers markets. So getting registered opens up the world, where you can take those eggs and sell them. Freezer meat. So cuts of beef, pork, and other livestock may be processed and labeled by a meat processor that meets federal regulations. So a fully inspected USDA or ODA to be eligible for sale to consumers. So when we're talking about things like beef and pork, you need to take those to someone who has a completely compliant or custom operators, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but a compliant place that is able to process them. These plants go through a lot to be able to process. There is a lot of rules when it comes to safety and sanitation, including, HACCP peak plans, water. They do a lot of testing on their water. The list goes on, and the small food guide does go into detail about what these slaughterhouses go through in order to make sure they're compliant. There is a lot of rules. So labels, one of the things to think about if you'd like to do a farm to table type freezer beef, labels must contain certain things like an inspection ID mark. So when you take it to one of these fully inspected by ODA or USDA places, they will have a mark that says that it was done and processed at one of these fully inspected places or slaughterhouses, the name of the product, the net weight, safe handling statements, it's going to need the establishment number as well, so where it was slaughtered and processed, and then if applicable, any ingredients. A note about when we're talking about these processing plants, there's over 200 in Ohio, but they need to have an inspector on site. So an ODA inspector, if an ODA inspector is on site, that meat can be sold within Ohio. So you'll take your animal there, the product you get back, that's something that you can sell throughout Ohio. If it's USDA inspected, a USDA inspected facility allows you to sell your meat across state lines. So if this is something you want to get into, it's definitely worth looking into where you would take that. And I'd also give that plant a call ahead of time, because a lot of them seem to be full or booked up. So making sure that they have availability or offer any sort of small scale service before you kind of get too deep into it, just to know, where you will end up taking this and the cost of how far you'll take it is a good thing to look into before you kind of go all the way in on anything, just to make sure you're not kind of getting the horse ahead of the cart here. And they can help you too with labels. A lot of times these processing plants have just a general label that they've sent through ODA already, that they've already had approved that you can put onto your product. But if you'd like to put any sort of special name or any statement or claim about your meat, you'll have to do your own ODA label approval, which can also take a lot of time. If you do choose to do freezer beef, and would like to take your animal and then pick up whatever was processed and then hold it for a later sale, you are going to need to get a warehouse registration. This can be requested online through ODA. There's an annual fee of $50 or more, depending on how big or how much freezer space you'd like to have. The storage area is going to need to be separate from other storage, so it can't be within your house. So you have to have a plan on where you're going to put that. The equipment must be suitable to keep food at a proper temperature. So just kind of planning that out if you would like to have the freezer beef situation, where you're going to store that meat. Custom exempt processing is different from a fully inspected facility. So custom exempt processing is where you basically take your animal to the processor and pick up your own animal from the processor. When that happens, they are going to label it not for sale. You can, custom exempt processing kind of works in the way of if someone would like to own a whole, half, or quarter portion of the animal, so you have an animal, but someone owns the other half of the portion, you can take that to the custom exempt processing facility, and the person who owns the other half or quarter of the animal may pick up their own portion. So you cannot sell it you can't sell a whole or quarter that you have picked up. Once you pick it up, it is yours. But another person who owns part of that animal may pick up their quarter or portion directly from the custom exempt processor. Poultry has is a little bit different when it comes to the sale of meat. There's a bit more when it comes to exemptions. Producers that raise and process 1,000 birds or less annually, if those birds were hatched and raised on the farm, they can be processed on site, but you can only process sound and healthy birds, of course. And once you do that, they can be sold directly to a hotel, institution, restaurant, consumer. I put an asterisk there because most hotel, restaurant institutions are going to want to see that the facility has been an approved facility. So, looking into the registration of a facility that is going to be producing those poultry. Producers that raise and process 1,000 birds or less annually must label with the name and address of the producer. There's going to be federal facility standards that they're going to need to comply with as well, record keeping requirements, voluntary state inspection with ODA, like I mentioned, and you're not allowed to deny access to any authorized inspector who wants to come and see what's going on. If you have 1,000 to 20,000 birds annually, and again, you're raising those birds by yourself, and birds are processed on a site that's been inspected by ODA, and you're only processing sound and healthy birds, again, sold directly to the hotel, institution, or restaurant. Again, you can do that there as long as you're following the packaging and labeling rules, including information about the ODA exempt status. You must comply with those federal facility standards. There's going to be additional record keeping requirements, and you also have to allow the inspector to see. If you'd like to do this is something that I would definitely recommend reaching out to ODA to look into, to talk about developing an SSOP program. So who's responsible for doing those sanitation type standards, keeping it healthy and clean, what is going to be cleaned, when these procedures are going to be performed, how to clean, disassemble equipment. So there's a lot more that goes into if you'd like to do this sort of custom exemption. There's a lot of rules that go into it, and they can help you develop that plan. They have a lot of resources online where you can see what a typical plan would look like. And then once you get that plan in place, they can then inspect and help you get that ODA voluntary inspection, and you can go from there. So just to kind of recap when it comes to eggs, because it gets kind of into the weeds with eggs and meat. When we're talking about farmers market, if you want to sell your frozen beef, chicken, pork at a farmers market, it must come from an inspected facility with a proper stamp and label. If you're going to store it for any amount of time, you have to have that warehouse license. And when you go to sell it, it needs to be sold from somewhere that has a retail food establishment license. So you need to have a retail food establishment license in order to do any sort of sales for that freezer beef. Selling eggs must be properly packaged and labeled. Registration and inspection with ODA, and then if not registered with ODA, you're going to end up needing to look into a retail food establishment license. So I talked about retail food establishment licenses earlier, and there's one I like to highlight because it's kind of more of the low risk. A lot of people have been, at least from my experience, I've been seeing freezer beef, especially moving into the mobile retail food establishment licensing as an option. So it's an establishment that's operated from a movable vehicle or other portable structure that routinely changes location. And it's not in the same location for the 40 consecutive days. You only need to get the mobile retail food establishment license in one county. So once you have that, you can move throughout the state of Ohio. Once you have a mobile retail food establishment license, it kind of opens the door to selling things like eggs, frozen and refrigerated meats, foods from home bakery food items, because you'll have the ability to keep them cold and at the proper temperature. Cheeses and dairy products as well, that opens the door for those dairy products, frozen foods. So there's just a lot more you can sell because you have that retail food establishment license. You're opening the door to a lot more. Highlights of the mobile retail food establishment license, it's going to be at a lower cost. So when we talk about those hazard levels, the associated cost with the registration tends to go up as the hazard level goes up, just because there's more regulatory things that need to be inspected and insured. So the cost of that license is going to go up. You can also sell prepackaged foods. You can use mechanical refrigeration or non-mechanical refrigeration. So ice packs, as long as the ice is coming from a compliant source. You have to display on the mobile retail food establishment the name of the operation and the city of origin and the telephone number. That's just one of those extra things that mobile retail food establishment needs to make sure they are aware of when they go into that. But again, you can just put that on the side of whatever you're using as your mobile operation. So that was kind of my sprint through food safety. I always add one final caveat. Food product liability should not be overlooked. So we talked about a lot of the exemptions from retail food establishment licenses. Just because you have an exemption doesn't mean that you're exempt from anything that might happen if someone gets sick. I always recommend talking to an insurance provider to make sure that you might be covered in the event something happens. So, things happen. Unfortunately, sometimes you want to make sure you're covered should anyone try to collect damages from you. So just thinking about food product liability, making sure that your food is always safe and ready for sale, and then being ready for the back end should the worst happen. Just a plug for Ohio Farm Bureau. We have a lot of great resources when it comes to not only the small scale food business guide, but other things. Our landowner toolkit goes into a lot of things like zoning. Zoning is something to think about when you are looking to open a farm market. There's also other things like fence line law, all that good stuff. We have our Ohio magazine. We recently featured the small scale food business guide in one of our Ohio magazines and other food safety information. And then Legal with Leah is a great podcast. She talks about all types of issues that we see in agriculture. And she has done several on food safety in the past. And I can answer any questions. I don't know how much time you have available, but I would be happy to answer questions.
Are there any questions here? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. So today was the first day I heard the term cottage foods, and that's for foods that can only be sold in the state of Ohio.
Mhm.
Is that a term that's also relevant to other states? Do they also call it cottage foods?
So cottage foods is I've seen it used in other states or home-based foods. Some places call it micro kitchens. But there is an idea in most states that there is some foods that are safe enough to be sold from the home. Every state is different on what can and cannot be sold as a home-based food. So it's not all of what you can, like some places allow a lot more than Ohio, some places allow a lot less when it comes to the unregistered, unlicensed sale of food. But there is that idea in other states.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mhm.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So Ashley Hutz with Smart Solve, very interesting. I actually, on a personal note, I lead a garden club. And so a lot of the ladies are what started out as like small scale stuff. Like a lot of them actually are like into canning, into the cottage food stuff. Like we even have people that are processing chickens now. So we have 20 ladies in this group, families, I should say, and it's almost bordering like a homesteader type of group. But I'm wondering, if we were one, do you speak at other events or, could you be a resource? I'd love to have the deck, but where would you point us to get more information? Is there like, a good spot where we could have access to the deck or Like a
Yeah,
website?
yeah, so the small scale food business guide goes into a lot. So it's small scale food business guide is something that's available to Farm Bureau members. Another resource I always love to point to is the Ohio State University, the extension CFAAS as well. They have a really great program. It's an online class that goes through a lot of that information for small scale. So there, I would definitely recommend checking out OSU and the scale food business guide. And as you grow, I believe the small scale food business guide is a good indicator of when you start thinking about those federal regulations. I like to point out a lot of those bigger rules as I'm walking through some of the smaller scale rules in that guide. But yeah, feel free to contact me. I put my contact information on the slide. So if you send me an email, I'd be happy to share some of these slides with you.
Perfect, thank you.
Mhm.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the process of going from a small producer into food processing? So for example, a small farm growing, say, chilies, being able to take those peppers into a food processor, say here at the CIFT knock, making a hot sauce.
Yeah, so when we talk about, especially when we're talking about fruits and vegetables, walking into the FMSCA, and I always get those letters, it's an alphabet soup. You're going to start walking into a lot more restrictions and oversight when it comes to where your water is coming from, how we're maintaining our fruits and vegetables. It's going to be more regulated in a sense of you're kind of going from nothing to everything, right? So it's going to be a lot more federal oversight, and you're going to be needing to follow those federal guidelines in order to make sure you're compliant with the rules for food safety. It's a lot of planning. There's a lot of this is what we plan to do, as well as the water can be a bigger issue I've seen, just because you have to make sure the water is compliant, and not coming from a source that is not testing well. That's one of the bigger ones I see people have issues with, or I have seen in the past. So that's moving from it's a nothing to everything. Um, so there are resources available on ODA that walk you through what you're going to be looking at when it comes to stepping up and complying with those federal rules that I highly recommend. It's also something I go through in the small scale food business guide. And it's something you should really start looking at as you start getting closer, like I said, to that 25,000. If you're making 25,000, that's the mark where you need to start being serious about looking into that.
Kind of along those lines of into the processing with like chilies, but where does fermentation fall into? My husband was doing some research and he wasn't quite sure where that fell under cottage goods or processing.
Fermentation, as in like a pickled.
Like pickle, sauerkraut, kimchi, sriracha.
So that is going to that kind of is moving more into the canned processing, and there is a whole section of and registration and qualifying factors for canneries. That is something I don't touch too much on. That is food safety specialist. That is something I hope to add to the small scale food business guide soon. But I am a lawyer. I am not a food safety expert, so I needed to do a bit more research when it came to that, and I didn't want to delay the food small scale guide any more than it already had been.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hi, I had a question. When you were going over the home bakery license process, we see a lot of people wanting to, take their talents outside of their home. Based on the process of reviewing the criteria to make sure a home is, able to bake the goods, is it ideal for that person to have ownership of that home versus being a renter? Is there differences when it comes to licensing allowance or additional approvals in those cases?
So I haven't heard of any, issues when it comes to owning versus renting a home. So long as you're looking at a home that is lived in, so you can't rent a home next door and go over there and cook and then come back to your own home. It has to be in where you're living. But other than that, it's made to be at home. You can't have a commercial oven. If you have a commercial oven, you're going to not be able to be a home bakery. So I haven't heard of any particular issues if someone is renting a home and they live in that home, because it's made for that normal kitchen.
Thank you.
I got a question. With the influx of farmers markets, are the people that run farmers markets having to be some of the gatekeepers of keeping people honest, I guess? You know, I'm just trying to think of, are they taking on responsibility sometime of how people come in to the markets?
So the local health department is in charge of food safety. So farmers markets could open the door, but it is the responsibility of the person bringing the food they'd like to sell to make sure that they are properly licensed. How individual farmers markets, if they are taking the initiative to do that, I have not seen that. There used to be a voluntary farmers market registration, and ODA has moved away with that. So farmers markets open up the door, but at the end of the day, it is the person who would like to sell products that require a retail food establishment license to go ahead and get that with their local health department.
Questions here?
Going back to the honey, I missed what you said. Did you say that flavored honey is TCS or not TCS?
I'm sorry, flavored honey is what?
Did you mention if flavored honey is TCS or non-TCS?
So flavored honey falls under the cottage food. Honey alone technically doesn't fall under cottage food, but it has its own exemption. It's just distinguished between the two, but flavored honey is on that cottage food list if that's what you're asking.
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
Hey, Kayla, there's some online questions. I forwarded those to you.
Yeah, Leah, are you able to see this on your screen or no? I can
No.
read it. Okay, so Erin Wright, she questioned, do you think the government will be relying on the states to screen for diseases as the CDC narrows their focus?
So ODA already does a lot of screening and maintaining health when it comes to diseases. They kind of work together. So you know, the state will step in if they see a foodborne illness. It's a bottom-up system. So the local health department are kind of the one on the ground if there's a report of a food safety. ODA also monitors depending on, you know, the situation. And then yes, the CDC is looking at those bigger issues as they start spreading from state to state. So it is a bottom-up system. Everyone's involved, and depending on how big the issue is kind of how far you'll see at least news of it when you get up to the federal level. You know, speaking of how the government is involved, there has been legislation recently in Ohio, at least, to expand its micro kitchen. So it would kind of expand that home-based food opportunity. You know, it's still a bill, so whether or not that'll be passed, it's something to keep an eye out for, because that will expand and definitely call for a big change in the small scale food business guide. But it will expand what someone would be able to sell from their home. There would be a registration. At this point, it would be ODA, but it would not be that retail food establishment license at this point.
Okay, then Jane asked, if selling a product that is primarily nuts, like maple nuts, for example, do you still have the allergen statement that it includes nuts?
You know, I don't recall off the top of my head, and I'd have to get back to you. My gut instinct is always to say always safe than sorry, right? So including that statement, but I would have to get back to you because I don't remember off the top of my head if you need to include that with a single item product. So I will get that information to Kayla as soon as possible so that is something that she can share.
Do we have any other questions here? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, for grains and flours, do those fall under the cottage rules, whether the producer, the farmer is selling them on site or off site? And then a second question is, would the processor of the flour being separate, you know, who's ever grinding it, being separate from the farmer, are they included in the statement of responsibility?
So grain processing has its own area of the law, kind of when it comes from the pure food safety. So if you are grinding your own flour, there's going to be regulations on what you can and cannot do and how that has to be done. Um, Typically, if you are buying flour from the grocery store, that's something you need to include in your ingredients list, but that comes from a source where it has obviously gone through all of the levels it needs to go through when it comes to the food safety law. You can do dry mixes of and cottage foods. I believe that is on the list. So the dry mix of cookies, if you want to sell those, that's within the cottage food. Um, Always double check me on that list, making sure it's up to date, but that is something that you are able to sell under that cottage food purview.
There was one more question online. Erin asked, is there a site we can get updates on that bill?
So if you go to the LSC, excuse me, the legislative website, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but you can look at all the bills in Ohio. I believe it's a micro kitchen. The bill's name is micro kitchen something. It's from Representative Gross. So just also keep, Ohio State is a good resource that keeps updates on bills that have to deal with agriculture, anything food. They're always updating people. That's something that Ohio Farm Bureau would definitely be updating our members about. It would be something that would be a total overhaul of the small scale food business guide. So it's definitely something that we would be talking about and informing people of what they could and could not do under that. I believe it's something, and this is just my personal opinion, it's probably something that would be a little bit slower getting into the groove of things because I believe there will probably be a bit of a rulemaking process if it were to pass as it is. Again, personal belief, ODA would probably have to shift a little to figure out how they are going to go about doing inspections that they would need to do under it. So I think there would definitely be a little bit of time for people to get set up for that.
Are there any other questions here or online? Leah, thank you so much. This was wonderful, and I'm sure that we all gained a lot of information here. Can we give her a round of applause?
Thank you. Thank you for letting me join today. I always love talking about my small scale food business guide. And I look forward to maybe updating it soon. It's always fun to keep it going when there's new laws, and been watching the federal government a little bit too. So they have me a little bit wary of the updates I might need to be doing soon. So just stay tuned.
Okay. All right. Thank you. You have a wonderful day.
You as well.